we'll assume that that worked and that was easy enough. So welcome everyone to this AMA for cross-stage collaboration in merge requests. So this is something that Pedro and I have been working on, and the context is that merge requests are really the center point for collaboration inside of GitLab, and all other groups and teams have integrated into this place over the years at GitLab, and so it's an area that has some gaps in user experience because there's not been sort of a consistent driver of that experience for users. And so we've put together a framework to help other groups who want to come and add things and features to the merge request, a way to do that and a way to work closely with the code review group during that process. And so it looks like there's questions in the doc. Pedro and I are happy to answer those, and we can go ahead and start there, unless Pedro, if you'd like to say anything before we go.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks, Kai. Great introduction. We have the first question from Sarah.
Thank you. So my question is focused on if teams have in-progress solution validation cycles where the solution is focused on adding things to the merge request or involving the merge request in some way, how would you like them to inform and engage you?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Again, without knowing the specifics, and I think the next question from Matt will probably be a specific example, but I would say that we should be involved as soon as possible, and that is something that is already part of the product process. So I linked to a section of the product processes page that already talks about that we should, if we think something would affect another group, we should involve them and ask them for feedback and all of that. So the new change that we merged just makes that involvement more clear and maps to the steps of the product development flow. And specifically about solution validation, because we don't have an established framework yet, we're working on the first framework for the merge request widgets. And so because we don't have that, we would follow the no established process. And the no established framework process, we should be accountable. So let me quickly share my screen so that we're all looking at the same thing. So that would mean that in this, when this happens, when there's no established framework, we would in solution validation be accountable. So that means that the group that is wants to change something in the code review experience, in the merge request experience, would be responsible for carrying out the work, hence the R here from responsible, but we would be accountable. So at the end, we would have to approve the solution validation and make sure that it's on par with what we expect it to be and align with everything else that we are doing as the code review group, but also that other groups are doing. So this adds, as it's noted here in this documentation, it adds some overhead of collaboration, but we think that given the current state of the merge request experience, we can no longer have an everyone can contribute approach without these guidelines in place and without this more formal collaboration. Yeah, without a specific example, it's difficult to talk more specific, basically. I don't know if that's answered.
I think question. Yeah. Tactically there, Sarah, the answer is tag us in your epics or issues that are in flight is sort of the tactical answer. That is what other groups that we've over the last couple of months where we've been working with other groups, that's how we've sort of engaged, is through epics and issues. And then if things escalated or got to a certain point where clarity wasn't clear on either side, we've had a couple sync calls as well to sort of go through those. But tagging us in epics and issues earlier the better for anything that's in flight now. We've been making bandwidth to have those conversations.
Awesome, thank you. I think that's it. I'll pass it on to Matt.
Cool. So I think mine is kind of an extension of Sarah's. So the item that I have is fairly old, and I guess my question is more, should we kind of go back and take it from the top of this process, because I've already got something we're developing against. It was in discussion with, I think, at least 3 stakeholders who are unfortunately no longer with GitLab. And so it's kind of a bunch of new faces, and we have solution validations and other things that we've kind of put in front of various folks. Pedro, I'm not 100% sure. I think Andy was actually been working with you on some of this, but it feels like we kind of did this between process. So I think that's kind of the long and short of it, is what should we do if we're already actively working on something that I thought was okay, but it looks like with this new framework is maybe needs some additional review.
Go ahead, Kai.
Yeah, I'm happy to start from my side. Erring on the side of usability and performance and all of the other concerns that our group is dealing with, I'm inclined to say not start over, but like, let's pump the brakes a little and have these conversations and make sure things make sense, to sort of what we're looking at today and what the state of the world is today versus what it might have been a year ago, and what sort of direction and philosophies we might have had then. And so that would be my preferred, and that might just be, if there's already, designs that have been validated through like your design team and solution validation, maybe it's just let's set up a quick 30-minute call, go through these, talk about the problem that you're trying to solve and what the solution looks like, and then we can go away and sort of think about that. And maybe that isn't going to be a thing that we we don't want to stop in-flight work, and the goal of this is not to sort of be the complete arbiters of what other groups are doing inside the merge request, but it is to make sure that we are aware, that other groups are aware, and that we don't create sort of conflicts or usability things that just don't make sense. And one of the key pieces of this that sort of brought some of these up was, we started looking at things in the merge request and trying to figure out why did they exist in the merge request, and who was the primary person that was for. And a lot of things in the merge request were there because there wasn't another good place to put them, but the people who might want to consume that information don't actually live in the merge request. And so what we have, what our group hopes to bring to those conversations is the experience of code review and who's in there and what their primary goals are. Because we don't talk to compliance folks. Like Sam and his group talk to a lot of compliance people, and so they come back with solutions that are very compliance focused and what they need, and sort of that's great, but compliance folk might not exist in the merge request all the time, and that might not be the best place to do that. And so maybe there are other ways to do that. And I think similarly for security, like we just need to have those conversations. But I would say for your in-flight work, like let's have a conversation as quickly as possible. And I think Pedro and I's calendars are fairly up to date and flexible in terms of doing that, and start there, and then see what other questions we have out of that.
Okay. No, that's fair. And I'm hopeful that it's at least in line somewhat with your direction, because the work that we are doing is in relation to critique of the security piece in the MR as it existed. So we were trying to already work towards a corrective goal. So I'll take that. So then I guess my quick follow on to that is, looking through everything in terms of the process, or when there's not a framework, that's great. I was curious, is there a best place or practice to document those things so that we know that we've already involved the right folks?
There's not. This is new, so we haven't gone through it with anyone yet to have that question come up. It's an interesting question, and I'd be happy to hear, if you have thoughts on like the way to do that. Maybe it's inside the epic that contains the work, that there's like a checkbox or something. I don't know. There's not a lot of, I'm personally inclined to stay away from process heavy things that would do that. And I think like our ask is really that we just want to be there. I think the risk that you're hedging against probably is that you feel like you had those conversations on the last thing you were working on and sort of got some buy-in, and now things have cycled over, and that those people change. And that's common at GitLab, that people change roles. And like, how do we know that those conversations happened and that was okay at some point in time, and now suddenly that's not okay, and we have to go sort of rework that? And so I'm open to whatever whatever thoughts you have or ways that you think might be valuable to do that.
I actually really I was thinking the same thing on the source issue or the epic, just create the matrix with checkboxes for it. I don't want it to seem like we're trying to track the process, but when you have a process and you have something that involves a RACI, by definition, you need to make sure that the people that are involved in that have done the things. And issue comments, they tend to get out of hand pretty quickly. So I want a single location where I can look to see, did the right people get involved? Have the right decisions been made? More for me than anything else, because I will forget. Honestly, on some of that, it's been so long, I kind of second guess, did we go through some of the steps that I thought we did? So I like that. I'll just start with checkboxes and the right matrix, and actually probably declaring the framework we're using would help too, just so it's clear to anyone else that's not on the team that looks at it.
Yeah, and about that specific example, the security reports. Let's imagine that everything goes well, like this was validated and it's in line with the other things that other groups are doing in the merge request experience, that it's aligned with what we believe is the right way to have this experience for code reviewers. In the end, what the most important thing, regardless of what we do, is to create that framework. So in this case, if I'm not mistaken, this would be to add a new tab or area specific for security vulnerabilities, correct?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Right. So in this case, we would have to think, or in this case, you and Andy, although Andy is, I think, off at the moment, but you and the designer and the rest of the team would have to think, okay, if some other group would like to use this approach for their content, so a new tab for something else, what are the decisions and the things that they need to think about before they go down this path? Because that's ultimately what we want the groups to be responsible for. Is if you're opening a solution to the world in an open source way so that other groups can use it, you're opening this potentially a Pandora box. So we need to have guidelines to understand when that time comes, why did the Threat Insights group decide this? Oh, it was because this and that, and these are all of the checks and balances that they made and the trade-offs before they realized we really need a tab for this, or maybe something else. So that's the ultimate goal that we want, is to have this responsibility and accountability to build these guidelines so that everyone is on the same page, regardless if product managers change or I don't know, if things change in the future, we always know why some approaches are better than others. Beck, you have a sub question about, do you want to voice that?
Yeah, I was just coming up with maybe some proposed solutions for how we can collaborate. I linked to an epic that I just opened related to that discussion that Pedro, you and I had about creating a framework for the inline notifications that we're looking at, both in code quality and very soon SAST and secret detection, and not doing so in a silo, and knowing that other teams may want to utilize this functionality that is currently being built out on the back end. So thinking more holistically and trying to make it scalable and flexible, taking into account where this might go. So I'm kind of the same question, just to piggyback off what Matt was saying. And I heard Kai say, there is no prescriptive process yet, but maybe we could start by trying some things, adding a code review label, or adding, just pinging the code review team at some point during the process as a step in, the list of things to do. I'm just trying to come up with ways that we can make sure everybody's involved and, provide that transparency.
Yeah. I think
Matt. So my video's not on.
Yeah, I think what Matt suggested before of having the RACI table and the matrix in the epic is a good thing. In the specific issues, I'm with Kai, where this is a new thing. We're still experimenting, so we are not exactly sure how even the groups themselves want to do it. And it would really depend from phase to phase. Like some of the phases we just want to be informed, others we want to be more hands-on and accountable, and others we just want to be consulted. So giving you feedback and you giving feedback to us so that we can then shape the work better. So I think I don't know, let's as soon as we go, or you think that you're going from one phase to the other, just ping us as soon as possible, and we will try to help and say, hey, this is enough. But I think in the meantime, it's better to over communicate than under communicate. And we have the opportunity here to define this, I think, as like whatever way we'd like. In just the UX group conversation that just happened before this AMA, Anoop was saying that he was very happy that we're doing this and we're starting this out in the code review group, and that maybe what we do here can help shape some guidelines for how we can extend this to all of GitLab and all of the other groups, and how we can better collaborate across stages. So yeah, things are a bit open at the moment. I don't know, Kai, if you have specific opinion on this.
No, I think that, I mean, we've said it already. I think you can tag Pedro and myself in an issue, and we can come take a look. And depending on where we are in the process, we'll have Pedro and I will have different opinions and different philosophies on how to look at certain things, and that's part of the beauty of this too. I think, yeah, we're open to being. I think he said it best: over communicated, and then we can figure out how to adjust that as we move forward. Awesome. Well, if there are no other questions, thanks everyone for coming and asking your questions. And for groups that watch this later, feel free to reach out to Pedro and I and tag us in some issues for upcoming things or things that you already have in flight that you might have questions about. We're really excited about this, and we think it'll make it a little more uncomfortable right now while we try and get some of these frameworks in place for how to add things to the merge request. But I think the long-term benefits for not only how other groups will contribute upcoming features with sort of defined ways to do that and defined problems to solve, but how users will interact with the merge request. The benefits we think are pretty large here. And so we're excited about it. So thanks everyone. And we look forward to working with all of you.
Can I ask one more question, actually?
Yeah.
So is the code review team, do you see yourselves as kind of the overseer of anything related to merge requests? Because I want to make sure that, because I'm working on an initiative touching merge requests and then working on this like larger framework on the side, there may be a number of issues out there in other teams that I'm unaware of parallel efforts happening. So I'm just trying to think of a way to surface those and just make sure that, you know, I'm aware of other efforts that may be conflicting, or maybe ways that we can contribute. So do you see yourselves as the code review team as like the overseer? And therefore, you know, you could help us connect efforts?
Yes, I would say yes to both of those. And that's a large reason we want to do this as well. One of the things that, the first part, do we see ourselves as the overseer? We think that the code review group is probably the best positioned group to have the user experience of the complete code review process in mind when thinking about all the features and other things that go in there. And so we have a set of features that we are focused on building, but we don't build the security features. We don't even build a lot of the approval and compliance features anymore. You know, this group's used to, but there's new groups that do that now. And so what we see ourselves as is sort of, I don't want to say overseer or like controller, but we want to be responsible for the merge request experience for all users and what that process looks like. And so that's what our involvement is. And then because of that, there are many groups that want to contribute. And so as Secure comes to us and says, hey, we want to do this, we might go, oh, well, the compliance group is working on, and I've said secure and compliance a lot because we've talked to both of those groups a lot. But this, they're working on this other thing that is very similarly related. There was another one recently that, testing is working on, or had been talking about a checks API or something similar like that. And the compliance group was also looking at something that would solve a very similar problem to allowing, a third-party check against mergeability. And so there were these competing sort of things that groups were doing out in silos that weren't being surfaced to each other, and were, because of the nature of phrasing and how you might talk about that in secure versus how you might talk about that within testing or another group, you would never know that. And so we've now seen some of these things, and we can take these groups and say, hey, here's this other thing that this group is working on. Here's this other thing that this group is working on. Here's sort of the overarching problem, and somebody can go down that path, and we don't end up with duplicated effort, and we don't end up with these competing solutions or these things that go against what other groups might be trying to do, or features that they think they can sell, but another group is just putting this in because they need basic functionality for something else, right? And so we're trying to, we want to be responsible for that experience. I will shout out that I have pitched that there should just be a merge request experience group that doesn't even have engineers and just has a product manager and designer and researcher that sit around and sort of watch over all of that. It hasn't happened yet, but I think that is sort of the level that we're trying to play on top of the feature work that we have for our group right now.
Yeah, I think something that's interesting, like from a secure perspective, I mean, so we're, piggybacking off of the backend work that the code quality team is currently doing to allow for inline notifications in the MR diff. SAST and secret detection are going to be utilizing that. And so I've come up with a couple design explorations. We'll soon go into solution validation for those. And then on the side, thinking about a framework, because I've heard other teams say, oh, that's really interesting, I want to take advantage of that as well. But when I go into solution validation testing, my instinct is to help secure users. So the developer, as well as the security analyst in the EMR, it's primarily the developer. This is part of like the shifting left mentality of getting developers to look at things that their code is triggering code quality alerts, SAST alerts, et cetera. But I'm also wondering if there are other personas that maybe aren't primary to secure that we should be considering, because they will also be affected, right? So I don't want to just think about how it's positively impacting our primary users, but want to also take into consideration how it might be negatively or positively impacting other personas. So in general, I'm just trying to think more holistically here and cross stage. So I don't know if either of you have any thoughts on that, on who to test with.
Yeah, I'll say I think that's one of the reasons that we've sort of put this together, is that groups do tend to focus on their primary user persona. And so we see these sort of gaps exist where, I think secure reports are an interesting one, because one of the questions that, and this is probably down in the weeds, but one of the things that we question about sort of secure in the merge request and in that area is like, is that immediately actionable to the people that are working in that merge request, and can they do anything about it? Because for code review, the primary experience that we care about is first commit on your feature branch, getting it to merged. And so everything else that's in there is sort of like the noise or the other things that people have to deal with. And so we want to make sure that we're inserting the right things at the right time to like ultimately get code merged. And what can happen is these other things come in. And so we've, testing had this, there's a feedback issue open from an engineer in code review who saw the new code quality badges in a diff. And he's like, well, what do I do with it? Like, it's noise to me while I'm trying to review code. My primary job is to review code. And now there's this other thing there, right? And so in the context of what code quality and testing did, that makes sense for their user persona and the features they're driving. The questions we're not asking enough of, and we're not doing a good enough job as an organization, are these the right things happening at the right times for sort of all of the merge requests. And so that's one of the reasons we put this in place, is to do this. And I think it's great that you're thinking that way. And we just want to help groups think that way based on sort of having a broader overview of all of that. And to Pedro's point, we are at time. So thanks, everyone. It was great. And we look forward again to collaborating with everyone.